Hi, I'm Zach. I work at Quartz, it's a global business news organization. There, I'm in charge of editorial strategy and product development and making sure that the two go hand in hand and are aligned. This talk is some observations I've had in just the 5.5 years that Quartz has existed about how information delivery and communication are shifting in just that short period of time, and a thread line through those shifts, which is the slow fading away of the interfaces in which people are getting that information. Sometimes those interfaces disappearing entirely. So in 1990, when Microsoft released Windows 3.0, it included for the first time a free copy of Solitaire among the applications that came standard with Windows. This was not to entertain people. I mean, it was Windows 3.0. This was exciting stuff enough. And a card game was not likely to make a difference in that regard. The intent of including Solitaire at that time was to help teach people how to use their mouse, how to click and drag a card from one portion of the screen to another. In other words, to figure out how a graphical user interface might work, a GUI. This had been, and with the rise of Windows, quickly became the dominant paradigm of how people use computers, and persisted, still persists 3 decades later with current versions of Windows. In fact, even as so much computing shifted to smartphones, you might have expected a shift from this paradigm away from GUIs, but instead, what happened was a shift doubling down on the GUI. And our most current form of smartphone dispenses almost entirely with buttons for a full screen mode of interaction, exemplified most by your array of apps on the home screen, hunting and pecking to select the information and request the information that you desire to get. But somewhat subtly, as smartphones have developed, there actually has been a shift, and a sort of a crack in the way people interact with these computers away from the GUI and towards something else entirely. So Android users will be familiar with the notion of widgets on the Android operating system, a shift from having to go into the app itself to explicitly request, in this case, the weather, to placing that information on your home screen, away from a hunt and peck paradigm toward more ambient information, where you just simply look at the screen and there's the weather information that you requested. iOS users, may be familiar with the newest forms of push notifications in iOS 10 and 11, where whole experiences that you might previously have gotten inside the app are instead coming to you and being consumed within the notification itself. Now, to be clear, these are still very much graphical user interfaces, but I would argue it's the beginning of a shift away from what underlies the GUI, the hunting and pecking, the explicit requesting of information, toward a different mode of getting that same information. And that, I think, is the best context in which to think about much newer platforms in which people are communicating and getting information. Oftentimes, I think voice is thought of as just a paradigm shift, like this is something entirely different, a totally new way in which people might communicate. And instead, I think it's better or more accurate to think about it as a through line from current forms of communication on mobile. What you're seeing here in a device that actually lacks a graphical interface is many of the same kinds of shifts that you're also seeing on your phone, which of course does have a graphical interface. I mean, really, more specifically, the most interesting new developments on platforms like Alexa or the Google Assistant are sort of preemptive moves by the operating system to bring you information that you're not explicitly requesting at the right time. So, a notification from Alexa that your package has just arrived, a notification from a Google Assistant that it's time to leave for the airport, because there's 30 minutes of traffic, and if you don't leave now, you'll be late. Attempts by these platforms to address the fact that without an actual graphical interface, it's not sufficient to expect that the user is going to always be making the request, and more important that the platform be good at presenting the information to you without the request in the first place. So you start to, when you think about it this way, you start to see that all over the place. This is the first ATM in the United States. It was introduced by Bank of Atlanta, First Bank of Atlanta in 1974. When First Bank of Atlanta rolled out the ATM, it chose to personify the device through, they called it a character named Tilly the all-time teller. Of course, in order to make people comfortable with the idea of shifting from banking with a human to banking with a machine. But you can draw a direct line from Tilly the all-time teller to present-day ATMs and to more contemporary forms of banking, the banking apps such as Venmo or Square, et cetera. And the lesson to draw from that, I think, is that typically a new technology presents itself in a really familiar form, a personified character such as Tilly, before the interface starts to fade away entirely and the underlying technology remains. Tilly, by the way, or the woman who played Tilly in First Bank of Atlanta's advertisements for this ATM, later went on to be the original voice of Siri, which I think is just a coincidence, and she had a great voice, but a great anecdote nevertheless. So take that lesson and apply it to the things we see today. On the left, the Curry home robot, which is performing tasks that hardly require being the embodiment of an actual robot or human, but choosing to do that in order to make the user more comfortable and accept the idea that they're bringing a so-called another member of the family into their home. Or more advanced forms of image recognition, with incredible power incredible power for the user and transforming the way we think about the photos on our phones, being presented in pretty familiar forms, such as a photo album, albeit one automatically generated for you. Just a few examples of this. It was sort of a great prelude to have Amy and Carrie talk about chatbots in their talk, because this is, I think, and as they were arguing, probably the most interesting way in which we see interfaces disappearing and leaving behind the core information value of what we used to get on a graphical interface. So you're probably all familiar with Foursquare, a Yelp competitor for food and travel recommendations. It emerged and remains an application where the primary form of interacting with it is typing in a search. But if you haven't tried their more experimental version of Foursquare called MarsBot, I'd encourage you to. It's a SMS-based version of the service, which is just passively tracking your location and then pushing to you recommendations when it decides it has a relevant recommendation related to both your current location and perceived interests. The same service, but totally shifting from a graphical interface where you're requesting the information to one where you're getting pushed the information. Now, I encourage you to use it because I think it's a great example of this trend, but also because it's not that great. And in experiencing the ways in which it's not great, I think will drive home, this one big significant shift here, which is when you're only pushing a single bit of information and choosing to do that when the user hasn't even requested it, the burden for the application becomes much higher. That this recommendation be genuinely relevant and actually additive to the experience, as opposed to presenting 10 search results for my query and hoping that at least one of them was accurate. Another good example of this shift, the fading away of an interface, is a scheduling application, X.AI. So we're probably all familiar with various graphical attempts to solve the problem of scheduling a meeting with people through graphical interfaces, where like, I input the times that I'm free, and then you input when you're free, and then the software takes care of matching up a convenient meeting time. So that's basically what X.AI is doing. And of course, they may have some somewhat trumped up claims about the artificial intelligence behind their application, which is actually not what's, in my opinion, interesting about what they're doing. What's interesting to me is they're doing the exact same kind of matching of schedules that used to happen on a graphical interface, except pulling away that interface entirely and doing it via email. So you're having an email exchange with an actual human and then just copying the service into that same interface. And then this novel approach to dealing with government bureaucracy by a British teenager who is fed up with the laborious process of challenging a parking ticket. So the interface for challenging a parking ticket in London is a series of elaborate steps on a difficult to use website involving many PDFs, and you can picture the kind of government website that it's based on. What this kid did is not change the process in any way, but change the interface. And essentially, to challenge a parking ticket, you just go through a series of steps. And here too, you're going through a series of steps, but in a much more natural and convenient form. In this case, a web-based chatbot. At Quartz, about 2 years ago, we released an app that tried to play with a lot of these same themes. So a large part of the experience of the app, occurs outside the app itself, outside what we think of as the square app icon, where most of the interactions for an app tend to occur. So on your lock screen through notifications, within the Today Center of your iPhone, on your watch, a lot of places where you can get genuine information value. And then inside the app, of course, it's a graphical interface, but we chose one that mimics text messaging, and it's sort of built and designed to look exactly the same, to adopt that same interface, so that there's not an additional interface to learn. And what we found is like that natural design pattern, one that the user didn't have to learn in the first place, was for some people like a vast improvement over the way they were expected to get information or news from other apps by reading the same kind of article that they would ordinarily get on the internet. And of course, we had in our mind that if you were able to recreate a chat-based interface within an app that you created yourself, there's no particular reason you couldn't take that exact same information and transfer it to an existing interface that was also based in chat. And so more recently, released a Quartz experience within Facebook Messenger that just adapts that application's interface to tell the news for users there. So sort of slowly peeling away the layers of interface. I mean, of course, there's still an interface here, and a graphical one at that, but one with far less chrome than you're used to or the user typically expects from an application. So a few lessons across all of these that I think you can more broadly apply wherever you're looking around at various new technology. The first is that new technologies start by taking an existing, more comfortable, familiar form, and then that form starts to fade away as consumers get more comfortable with it. You can apply this lesson, I think, too, to predict what's likely to happen in the future with existing technologies. So, for instance, the notion of an electric car charger borrows heavily from our existing idea of what a gas station is supposed to look and feel like. But I think it's fair to project forward and assume that the interface of the gas station can fade away entirely, and the charging hardly needs to happen when the vehicle's stationary in a specific location. And what I challenge us all to think about, and if you're interested, would love to talk about over lunch, is how these shifts are likely to affect all sorts of businesses. For instance, this is an Amazon Dash button. And what does it mean for a consumer company, such as or a consumer brand such as Huggies, when the interface that you're used to interacting with, whether it's direct whether it's in a supermarket or on Amazon's website, starts to fade away and disappear almost entirely, to the point at which making the purchasing decision is literally just the push of a button.